The howl of a coyote pierced the night as Madeline Walker stumbled through the darkened streets of Wallace, Montana territory, her arms empty where a precious bundle should have been. The year was 1878, and Wallace was little more than a dusty stopover for cattle drivers and prospectors seeking their fortune in the untamed West. The moon cast long shadows across the wooden boardwalks as she collapsed against the hitching post outside the town's only hotel, her strength finally giving out after days of searching. Madeline's chestnut hair hung in limp strands around her tear-stained face. Her once fine traveling dress was torn and mudded from her relentless search. At 24, she'd already endured more heartache than most faced in a lifetime. The stagecoach journey from Boston to this frontier town had been meant as a fresh start, not another chapter of tragedy. "Please," she whispered to no one, her throat raw from days of calling out. "Someone help me." Inside the Wallace Hotel's small saloon, Xavier Galloway nursed a whiskey, his tall frame hunched over the scarred wooden bar. At 30, his face already bore the weathered lines of a man who'd spent his life under the harsh western sun. His cattle drive had ended 2 days prior, the herd sold to a buyer from Helena, leaving him with a pocket full of money and nowhere particular to be. The barkeep, a balding man named Frank, wiped down the counter with a rag of questionable cleanliness. "You heading back to your ranch soon, X?" Xavier ran a hand through his dark hair, a streak of premature silver at his temple catching the lamplight. "First light tomorrow." "Been away too long already." A commotion outside drew their attention, muffled sobs and the frantic voice of Mrs. Patterson, the hotel owner's wife. "Lord have mercy, child. Someone fetch Doc Miller." Xavier wasn't one to involve himself in strangers' troubles, but something in the desperation of the woman's cries pulled him from his seat. He set his half-finished drink on the bar and strode toward the door, his spurs jingling with each step. Outside, he found Mrs. Patterson kneeling beside a young woman who had clearly collapsed from exhaustion. Her face was pale as parchment in the moonlight, save for the fevered flush of her cheeks. "What happened?" Xavier asked, crouching down beside them. Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Found her like this. Been in town 3 days, searching everywhere, barely eating or sleeping from what I hear." The young woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer grass. For a moment, her gaze seemed unfocused, then it locked onto Xavier with startling clarity. "I lost my baby," she whispered brokenly, her voice barely audible over the distant piano music drifting from the saloon. Something shifted in Xavier's chest, a recognition of pain he understood all too well. Without thinking, he reached out and took her trembling hand in his calloused one. "But you haven't lost your heart," he said quietly, his deep voice gentle in a way few in Wallace had ever heard. "And while that's still beating, there's hope to be found." Mrs. Patterson looked at him in surprise. Xavier Galloway wasn't known for poetic words or comforting strangers. He was respected as a capable rancher and a fair businessman, but warmth wasn't a quality most would associate with him. "Let's get her inside," Xavier said, carefully lifting Madeline into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he frowned at how fragile she felt. "Send someone for the doctor." As he carried her into the hotel, Madeline's head lolled against his shoulder, her consciousness slipping away again. But her fingers clutched weakly at his shirt, as if holding onto his words like a lifeline in a storm. "Doctor." Miller arrived within 20 minutes, his medical bag in hand and sleep still evident in his eyes. The room Mrs. Patterson provided was small but clean, with a narrow bed where Madeline now lay. "Exhaustion, dehydration, and a touch of fever," the doctor pronounced after his examination. "Nothing that rest and proper care won't mend, physically at least." He glanced at Xavier, who had remained by the door. "Do you know anything about her situation?" Xavier shook his head. "Only that she's lost a child." The doctor's face softened with understanding. "I'll leave some powders for the fever. She needs to drink plenty of water when she wakes and broth if she can manage it." After the doctor left, Mrs. Patterson bustled about making the patient comfortable, but Xavier found himself unable to leave. There was something about this woman's plight that had caught hold of him, perhaps because it echoed his own loss from years before. "I'll sit with her a while," he said, surprising himself as much as Mrs. Patterson. "You should get some rest." The older woman hesitated, then nodded. "Ring the bell if there's any change. I'll bring up some broth later." Alone with the unconscious woman, Xavier settled into a chair by the window. Outside, the town of Wallace was settling down for the night, the last drunk stumbling home from the saloons. He should be getting rest himself before his ride home tomorrow, but instead he found himself keeping vigil for a stranger. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Madeline stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion evident as she took in the unfamiliar room and the man dozing in the chair by the window. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Xavier straightened immediately, shaking off his light sleep. "Wallace Hotel. You collapsed outside last night." Memory flooded back, and with it came the grief. Madeline's hand went instinctively to her flat stomach. "My baby," she whispered. Xavier poured water from a pitcher on the nightstand and brought it to her. "Drink first," he said gently, "then we'll talk." She obeyed, her hands shaking so badly that he had to help her hold the glass. When she drunk her fill, she sank back against the pillows, exhaustion still evident in every line of her body. "I'm Madeline Walker," she said after a long moment of silence. "I came west from Boston on the stage 3 days ago. Xavier Galloway. Most folks call me X." He settled back in his chair. "I'm a rancher. Got a place about half a day's ride from town." Madeline's gaze drifted to the window, where the morning light was growing stronger. "I was 7 months along when I left Boston. The baby my daughter wasn't due for weeks yet." Her voice caught. "The stagecoach hit a rut outside town. I fell hard. The pains started that night." Xavier remained silent, knowing sometimes what people needed most was simply to be heard. "Doctor." "Miller delivered her 2 days ago. She was too small, too early." A tear slipped down Madeline's cheek. "She lived just long enough for me to hold her once, to name her Elizabeth after my mother." "I'm sorry," Xavier said, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Madeline wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "After the burial, I couldn't stay in that room. I've been walking, searching, as if I could find her somewhere in this town if I just looked hard enough." She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor. "Madness, I know." "Not madness," Xavier said quietly. "Grief." Something in his tone made her really look at him for the first time, the creases around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, the set of his jaw that suggested he understood loss intimately. "You said something to me last night," Madeline said, "about my heart." Xavier nodded slowly. "That as long as it's still beating, there's hope." "Do you truly believe that?" He considered her question carefully. "I have to," he finally said. "Otherwise, what's the point of continuing on?" A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Patterson entered with a tray bearing a bowl of broth and some bread. "Oh, thank the Lord you're awake, dear," she said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I've been worried sick. You need to get some nourishment in you." As Madeline attempted to eat under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye, Xavier rose from his chair. "I should be going. Got a long ride ahead." Madeline looked up, an inexplicable panic rising at the thought of this stranger leaving. He was the only person in Wallace who seemed to understand her pain, who'd offered not platitudes but recognition of her grief. Will you come back?" she asked, then flushed at her own boldness. Xavier paused at the door, studying her face. Something about this woman called to him, a kindred spirit, perhaps. "I'll be back in town in a week for supplies. I'll check in on you then." It wasn't until he was halfway down the stairs that Xavier realized he'd postponed his departure without a second thought. His ranch hands were expecting him back, and there was work waiting that wouldn't do itself. Yet the thought of leaving Madeline Walker alone with her grief felt wrong somehow. Outside, Wallace was coming to life with the morning bustle. Xavier made his way to the livery where his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, waited. "Thought you'd be gone by now," remarked the stable boy as he saddled Copper. "Got delayed," Xavier said simply, checking his saddlebags. "Tell Wilson I need to send a message to my ranch." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled a note informing his foreman he'd be delayed another day. With that settled, Xavier led Copper out into the morning sun. He had errands to run, arrangements to make, and a telegram to send. But first, he had a stop to make at the small cemetery on the edge of town. The graveyard was quiet this early, dew still clinging to the sparse grass between markers. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for: a small, fresh mound of earth with a simple wooden cross bearing the name Elizabeth Walker in newly carved letters. Xavier removed his hat, standing in silence before the tiny grave. He wasn't much for praying, but he found himself hoping that wherever this child's spirit had gone, it was someplace peaceful. After a moment, he noticed a small bunch of wildflowers already placed at the base of the cross. Madeline's doing, no doubt, during one of her desperate wanderings through town. He returned to the hotel around noon to find Madeline sitting up in bed, her color somewhat improved though dark circles still shadowed her eyes. She looked surprised to see him. "I thought you were leaving," she said, "had some business to attend to." He set a parcel wrapped in brown paper on the bed. "Thought you might need this." Curious, Madeline unwrapped the package to find a black dress, simple but well made, and of better quality than anything available in Wallace's general store. Mrs. Blackburn at the dressmaker's had it ready for another customer who never claimed it, Xavier explained. "Said she could alter it for you if needed." Madeline ran her fingers over the fabric, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. My traveling clothes are hardly presentable anymore." Xavier shifted uncomfortably, unused to such gestures himself. "There's something else. I'd like to show you something tomorrow if you're feeling strong enough." "What is it?" "Just something I think might help." He moved toward the door. "Rest today. I'll come by in the morning." Madeline watched him go, puzzled by this taciturn cowboy who seemed determined to help her through her grief. She didn't understand his interest, but found herself grateful for it nonetheless. In this strange town, far from everyone she'd ever known, Xavier Galloway's unexpected kindness was like finding water in the desert. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect September day in the Montana Territory. Xavier arrived at the hotel as promised, leading 2 horses, his own Copper, and a gentle mare borrowed from the livery. Madeline appeared in the hotel doorway wearing the black dress, which Mrs. Blackburn had indeed altered to fit her slender frame. Her hair was neatly braided, and though grief still marked her features, she looked stronger than the day before. "I'm not sure I can ride," she admitted, eyeing the mare uncertainly. "Daisy here is calm as they come," Xavier assured her, "and I'll be right beside you." With his help, Madeline mounted the mare, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. Xavier showed her how to hold the reins and gave her a few minutes to get comfortable before they set off at a walk. They rode east out of Wallace, following a well-worn trail that wound through pine-covered hills. Madeline was silent for most of the journey, focusing on staying balanced in the saddle and taking in the breathtaking scenery around them. Xavier didn't press for conversation, allowing her the peace of the Montana wilderness. After about an hour, they crested a hill, and Xavier reined in his horse. "We're here." Below them lay a small valley, sheltered by surrounding hills and bisected by a clear stream. Wildflowers dotted the meadow grasses, and a stand of aspens at the far end trembled with golden leaves. It was an idyllic spot, untouched by the rough human elements that characterized much of the frontier. "It's beautiful," Madeline said softly. Xavier dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "My wife found this place," he said quietly, "called it her thinking valley." Madeline looked at him in surprise. "You're married?" "Was." His face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sarah died in childbirth 5 years ago, our son with her." Understanding dawned, and Madeline felt a rush of connection to this man who'd experienced a loss so similar to her own. "That's why you stopped to help me," Xavier nodded, leading her toward a flat rock beside the stream. "Grief recognizes grief." They sat in companionable silence for a time, listening to the gentle babble of water over stones and the rustle of aspen leaves in the breeze. "Tell me about Boston," Xavier finally said. "What brought you all the way out here?" Madeline picked up a small stone, turning it over in her hands. There was nothing left for me there. My parents died of influenza 2 winters ago. I was a governess for a wealthy family until, she hesitated, until circumstances made that impossible. Xavier didn't press, but Madeline found herself wanting to explain. This man had shared his own pain. She could trust him with hers. The son of the house, the eldest, he was charming, attentive, made promises. Her voice hardened. When I told him about the baby, he denied everything, said I was trying to trap him, that no one would believe a governess over him. His parents dismissed me without a reference. Xavier's jaw tightened. The baby's father, yes, Madeline tossed the stone into the stream. I had a little money saved, enough for stage fare west and a small start somewhere new, I thought. Her voice broke. I thought Elizabeth and I would build a new life together, away from the scandal. And now, Xavier asked gently. Madeline shook her head, tears threatening again. I don't know, I haven't thought beyond my grief. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Wallace could use a school teacher. Town's growing, lots of families with young ones. Current teacher is leaving at month's end, her husband got work in Helena. Madeline looked at him in surprise. You think I could teach here? You were a governess. Can't imagine the town council would find anyone more qualified within 100 miles. He shrugged. Just a thought. It was more than that, Madeline realized. It was a lifeline, a purpose to fill the void left by her daughter's death. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but the mere suggestion planted a seed of possibility. Thank you for bringing me here, she said, and for telling me about your wife and son. Xavier nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. Sarah would have liked you, I think. She believed in moving forward, even when it seemed impossible. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. We should head back before the afternoon cools too much. The ride back to Wallace was easier, Madeline growing more comfortable in the saddle. As they approached town, she found herself reluctant for the day to end. Xavier's quiet company had been a balm to her raw emotions. Will you introduce me to the town council? She asked as they reached the livery. About the teaching position. A rare smile crossed Xavier's face, transforming his features. I'll arrange a meeting. Mayor Thompson will be pleased as punch to find a qualified teacher so quickly. True to his word, Xavier arranged a meeting for the following afternoon. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with an impressive mustache, and 2 council members met with Madeline in the hotel's small dining room. Boston education, you say? The mayor asked, clearly impressed. And experience teaching children of various ages. Yes, sir, Madeline confirmed. I taught the Henderson children for 3 years reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and basic sciences. Before that, I assisted at the Girls' Academy where I received my own education. Council member Mrs. Owens, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, studied Madeline carefully. And what brings you to Wallace, Miss Walker? It's quite a change from Boston. Madeline had prepared for this question. With a steady voice, she said, I recently lost my husband and our unborn child. There were too many painful memories in the East. I came west hoping for a fresh start. It wasn't entirely a lie, just a reshaping of her circumstances into something more acceptable to frontier sensibilities. Xavier, standing quietly by the wall, gave her an approving nod. My deepest condolences, said Mayor Thompson, clearly moved. Well, your credentials are impeccable and our need is immediate. The school term is set to begin in 2 weeks. The position comes with living quarters above the schoolhouse and a salary of $30 per month. It was a modest salary, but with housing included, it would be enough for Madeline to live on. I would be honored to accept, she said. Excellent, the mayor beamed. Mrs. Owens will show you the schoolhouse tomorrow. We'll have everything ready for you to move in by week's end. As the council members filed out, Xavier approached Madeline. Congratulations, teacher, he said, his eyes warm with approval. Suits you? I wouldn't have had this opportunity without your help, she replied. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed. He glanced out the window where the afternoon light was beginning to fade. I'll be heading back to my ranch tomorrow. Got responsibilities I've been neglecting. Madeline felt a pang of disappointment. In just a few days, Xavier had become her only friend in Wallace. Of course. You've already done more than enough. I'll be back in town in a couple weeks, he said, perhaps sensing her dismay. Need to bring some cattle to the stockyards. I'll check in, see how you're settling. It was a small promise, but Madeline found herself clinging to it. I'd like that. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Owens showed Madeline the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with rows of benches, a teacher's desk, and a small blackboard. The living quarters upstairs were basic but clean, with a bedroom, small sitting area, and a tiny kitchen. The women of Wallace rallied around their new teacher, bringing furniture, linens, and household necessities to make the place habitable. Madeline was touched by their generosity, though she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the attention after her days of solitary grief. Each evening, she visited Elizabeth's grave, bringing wildflowers or simply sitting in quiet communion with her lost child. The acute pain was slowly transforming into a dull ache that she suspected would never fully leave her, but it was becoming bearable. On the Sunday before school was to begin, Reverend Clark introduced Madeline to the congregation at the small white church on Wallace's Main Street. 28 children would be attending her school, ranging in age from 6 to 15. "We're blessed to have a teacher of Miss Walker's caliber join our community," the Reverend announced. "Let us make her feel welcome and support her important work." Madeline smiled and nodded at the curious faces turned her way, even as anxiety fluttered in her stomach. Tomorrow she would stand before those children and begin building a new life one she'd never planned for, without the daughter she'd expected to center it around. That night, she sat at her small table preparing lessons by lamplight, fighting waves of doubt. What if she couldn't do this? What if her grief overwhelmed her in front of the children? What if the respectable citizens of Wallace somehow discovered the truth about her late husband? A knock at her door startled her from these worries. Few people called in the evening, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Warily, she opened the door to find Xavier Galloway standing there, his hat in his hands. "Xavier," she exclaimed, unable to hide her delight, "I thought you weren't coming to town for another week." "Finished my work early," he said, a half-smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Thought you might appreciate some moral support before your first day," Madeline laughed, relief washing through her. "Is it that obvious I'm nervous?" To someone who knows what to look for. He glanced past her at the papers spread across her table. "Working late." "Just finishing tomorrow's lessons." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to come in? I have coffee." Xavier nodded, stepping inside and carefully closing the door behind him. Madeline was suddenly conscious of how this might appear to others, an unmarried woman entertaining a man alone in her quarters after dark, but she pushed the thought away. The people of Wallace respected Xavier. His presence wouldn't raise eyebrows. As she busied herself with the coffee pot on her small stove, Xavier examined her lesson plans with interest. "This is thorough," he commented. "You've put a lot of thought into it." "I want to do well," Madeline admitted, bringing 2 steaming cups to the table. "These children deserve a good education, even out here on the frontier." "You sound like Sarah," Xavier said, accepting his cup. "She was determined our children would be educated no matter where we lived." A shadow crossed his face. "She collected books, planned lessons, even though our son never drew breath." Madeline reached across the table and touched his hand. "Tell me about her." Xavier was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "She was strong. Didn't complain about the hard life out here, even when we were just starting and had nothing but a one-room cabin and big dreams. She could ride as well as any man on my crew, but she also insisted on growing flowers around the house." He smiled at the memory. "Said a home needed beauty to balance the practicality." "She sounds wonderful," Madeline said softly. "She was." Xavier met Madeline's eyes. "The grief, it doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you can carry without being crushed by it." Madeline nodded, understanding what he was trying to tell her. "I'm starting to feel that. Some days are still overwhelmingly dark, but others, I can see glimpses of light ahead." They talked until the coffee was gone and the lamp began to burn low, exchanging stories and building a friendship that felt increasingly precious to them both. When Xavier finally rose to leave, Madeline walked him to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. I feel much calmer about tomorrow now. You'll do fine, he assured her. Those kids are lucky to have you. He settled his hat on his head, then hesitated. I'll be back in town on Saturday. Would you have dinner with me at the hotel? The invitation caught Madeline by surprise. It sounded suspiciously like courting, though she told herself not to read too much into it. I'd like that, she answered, a warm flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with grief for once. Xavier tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Walker. Good night, Mr. Galloway. As she watched him descend the exterior staircase and disappear into the night, Madeline realized something had shifted between them. What had begun as an act of compassion from a stranger was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated. Her first week of teaching passed in a whirlwind of names to learn, lessons to give, and routines to establish. The children were mostly eager to learn, though a few of the older boys tested her authority at first. By Friday, she'd won over even the most reluctant students with her firm but kind approach. Saturday evening found her preparing for dinner with more care than she'd taken with her appearance in months. She wore her black dress, her only good one, but brightened it with a blue silk scarf Mrs. Owens had given her as a welcome gift. She even pinched some color into her cheeks, which had begun to lose their pallor as she spent more time outdoors. Xavier was waiting for her in the hotel lobby, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. He looked different away from his ranch, still every inch the cowboy, but with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. You look lovely, he said simply as she approached. Thank you. Madeline smiled, noting the approving glances from other diners as Xavier escorted her to a table. Being seen with one of the area's respected ranchers was apparently good for her standing in the community. Over a dinner of roast beef and potatoes, the hotel's Saturday special, they talked about her first week of teaching and the goings-on at his ranch. It felt wonderfully normal, this conversation between a man and woman with no grief shadowing every word. My oldest ranch hand, Hank, says we're in for an early winter, Xavier was saying. Claims his joints never lie about these things. Madeline laughed. Mrs. Owens says the same. Should I be worried? I've never experienced a Montana winter. It can be harsh, Xavier acknowledged, but the town looks after its own. You'll need to lay in supplies, firewood especially. I can help with that. I'd appreciate it. I'm afraid my Boston upbringing didn't prepare me for frontier winters. Xavier studied her face. Do you miss it? The city, I mean. Madeline considered the question seriously. I miss certain things, libraries, theaters, the energy of so many people, but I'm finding there are compensations here. The open sky, the mountains, the way neighbors truly care for each other, she smiled. And the children are wonderful, even the troublemakers. Sounds like you're adapting well, Xavier observed. Wallace is lucky to have found you. I think perhaps it's the other way around, Madeline replied softly. Wallace found me when I needed it most. After dinner, Xavier walked her back to the schoolhouse. The night was clear, stars brilliant in a way they never appeared in Boston's smoke-filled skies. They stopped at the foot of her stairs, both reluctant for the evening to end. Thank you for dinner, Madeline said. It was lovely to have a night out. Xavier nodded, suddenly seeming a bit uncertain. I've been thinking, he said after a moment. My ranch is short-handed, and with winter coming, there's plenty to do. I'll be staying in town more often these next few weeks. Madeline's heart quickened at the implication. I'm glad to hear it. Perhaps we could do this again, he suggested. Maybe go for a ride on Sunday afternoon if you're not too busy with school preparations. I'd like that very much. In the moonlight, Xavier's expression softened. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Good night, Madeline. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. Good night, Xavier. As autumn progressed into early winter, their courtship blossomed. Each weekend, Xavier would come to town, and they would ride or have dinner, or simply walk together through the streets of Wallace. Sometimes he would join her for Sunday services at the church, sitting beside her in the pew with a solemnity that spoke of respect rather than religious fervor. The townsfolk watched with approving eyes. Xavier Galloway had been alone too long, they said, and the new schoolteacher was a perfect match for him, educated enough to be interesting, but practical enough for frontier life. Only Mrs. Owens, who had become something of a confidante to Madeline, expressed concern. "He's a good man," she said one afternoon as they quilted together in Madeline's quarters. "But you've both known such loss. Are you certain your feelings aren't born of shared grief rather than true affection?" Madeline considered this as she stitched. "Our shared experiences brought us together," she admitted. "But what's growing between us now is something different, something hopeful rather than sorrowful." Mrs. Owens nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Just be sure of your heart, dear, and his." By December, snow blanketed Wallace and the surrounding countryside. The schoolhouse was warm and snug thanks to the cords of firewood Xavier had arranged to have delivered. Her students continued to progress, and Madeline found genuine joy in watching them learn, even as she occasionally wondered what Elizabeth might have been like as a student someday. On the last day before the Christmas break, a fierce blizzard blew in from the north. Madeline dismissed her students early, ensuring each one had proper escort home through the swirling snow. She was just banking the fire in the schoolroom stove when the door burst open, admitting a snow-covered Xavier. "Xavier," she exclaimed, "what are you doing out in this weather?" He stamped snow from his boots, unwinding a scarf from around his face. "Came to town for supplies before the storm, got caught when it moved in faster than expected." He looked around at the empty classroom. "Where are your students? Sent them home early. I was worried about the weather." She took his coat, hanging it near the stove to dry. "You must be freezing. Come upstairs, I have coffee and stew." In her small quarters, Xavier thawed by the fire while Madeline served hot food. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and driving snow against the glass. "You'll have to stay in town tonight," Madeline said, watching the worsening storm. "No one should be out in that." Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. "Hotel will be full with stranded travelers. I might need to bunk in the livery with Copper." Madeline hesitated, then made a decision. "You can sleep here," she said firmly. "On the settee, it's too cold for you to stay in the stable." Xavier looked at her, concern evident in his eyes. "That could damage your reputation." "I'm a grown woman, and this is an emergency," she replied. "Besides, Mrs. Owens lives next door. She can vouch for your honorable behavior if anyone asks." A smile tugged at his mouth. "My honorable behavior, is it?" Madeline felt her cheeks warm. "You know what I mean." As the evening progressed, with the storm raging outside and the fire crackling within, Madeline felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from her life for too long. They talked easily, played cards, and shared stories from their childhoods. "My father was a banker," Madeline explained, dealing another hand. "He expected me to marry well and live the proper Boston life. He'd be shocked to see me now a schoolteacher in a frontier town." "Would he disapprove?" Xavier asked. Madeline considered this. "He'd worry about the hardships, but he always wanted me to be happy. I think he'd come to understand." She looked up at Xavier. "What about your parents?" "My father was a wanderer, never stayed anywhere long. My mother raised me mostly on her own in a series of mining towns." Xavier's expression grew distant. "She died when I was 16, typhoid. After that, I worked cattle drives until I could save enough to start my own place." "You've built something remarkable," Madeline said softly. "Your ranch, your reputation in the community, you should be proud." Xavier looked at her across the table, his gaze intense. "For a long time, I thought I was building it all for nothing, just a legacy with no one to leave it to, but lately—" He trailed off, then reached across to take her hand. "Lately, I've been thinking there might be a future worth building for after all." Madeline's breath caught at the implication in his words. They had grown close over these months, their friendship deepening into something more, but neither had spoken of a shared future until now. "Xavier," she began, uncertain what to say. He squeezed her hand gently. "You don't need to say anything. I know it's still early days, just wanted you to know where my thoughts have been heading." The blizzard continued through the night, with Xavier sleeping on the small settee while Madeline took her bed. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving Wallace transformed into a glistening white landscape. School would remain closed until after Christmas, giving Madeline an unexpected holiday. Xavier departed after breakfast, needing to check on his ranch and workers, but promised to return for the town's Christmas celebration in 3 days' time. Madeline watched him ride away, his tall figure silhouetted against the snow-covered hills, and felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The Christmas gathering was held in the church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the occasion. Children performed a nativity play that Madeline had helped organize, and afterward, the community shared a potluck dinner in the adjoining meeting hall. Xavier arrived halfway through the evening, having ridden through freshly fallen snow to attend. He presented Madeline with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "Merry Christmas," he said simply. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Madeline opened it to find it empty, waiting for portraits or mementos to be placed inside. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touched by the thoughtful gift. "I thought," Xavier said hesitantly, "that you might want something to keep a memory of Elizabeth close to your heart, perhaps a lock of her hair if you have one." Tears sprang to Madeline's eyes at his understanding. She did indeed have a tiny curl of dark hair, carefully preserved in tissue paper, that Dr. Miller had helped her collect before Elizabeth was laid to rest. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Would you help me put it on?" As Xavier fastened the clasp behind her neck, his fingers brushing her skin, Madeline felt a certainty settle over her. This man who had found her at her lowest point, who understood her grief, who supported her new beginning, was becoming essential to her happiness. The winter months passed slowly, with deep snow making travel between town and outlying ranches difficult. Xavier made it to Wallace when he could, sometimes staying for just a few hours, other times for a day or two when weather permitted. Each visit strengthened the bond between them, their courtship progressing with a steady certainty that felt both exciting and comfortable. By March, as the first hints of spring began to appear, Madeline had integrated fully into Wallace's community. Her students were thriving, she'd formed friendships with several townswomen, and her grief, while still present, had transformed into something she could carry without being consumed by it. One sunny Saturday, as patches of grass began to emerge from melting snow, Xavier took Madeline riding to his Thinking Valley. The aspens were still bare, but tiny green buds promised new leaves soon. They picnicked beside the stream, which ran high with snowmelt. "I've been meaning to show you something," Xavier said after they'd eaten. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded paper, handing it to her. Madeline opened it to find architectural drawings for a house larger than a cabin but modest in size, with a wraparound porch and several rooms clearly marked. "My ranch house needs replacing," Xavier explained. "The old cabins served me well, but it's time for something more substantial." Madeline studied the plans with interest. "It's lovely, you've put a lot of thought into it." "Notice anything particular?" he asked, watching her face closely. She looked again, more carefully this time. "There was a large kitchen, a study lined with bookshelves, and upstairs a nursery," she said softly, her finger tracing the small room adjacent to the main bedroom. "And this," Xavier said, pointing to another space marked schoolroom. "For when the children are young, before they're old enough to ride to town for school." Madeline's heart pounded as the full implication of the plans became clear. "Children?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Xavier took her hands in his expression serious but gentle. "I know we can't replace the ones we lost. Elizabeth, my son, they'll always be part of us, but I believe there's room in our hearts for more love." Tears filled Madeline's eyes, not of grief this time, but of hope. "You're talking about our future together." "I am." Xavier shifted to kneel before her on the new spring grass. "Madeline Walker, I love you. Your strength, your kindness, the way you've built a new life from tragedy. I want to build the rest of my life with you if you'll have me." Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and unexpected. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Xavier." His smile was radiant as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She'd be proud to see you wearing it." They were married in Wallace's church on a perfect May afternoon, with wildflowers decorating the altar and Madeline's students singing hymns for the occasion. Mrs. Owens had helped sew a wedding dress of pale blue silk, not white, in deference to Madeline's supposed widowhood, but beautiful nonetheless. Reverend Clark spoke of new beginnings and the blessing of finding love after sorrow. Xavier, standing tall and handsome in a new suit, looked at Madeline as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And when they spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought them, both felt the presence of those they had lost, not as ghosts haunting their happiness, but as beloved memories blessing their future. The celebration afterward was the biggest Wallace had seen in years, with ranchers from miles around joining townspeople in the festivities. There was dancing, feasting, and so much goodwill that Madeline felt almost overwhelmed by it all. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Galloway." Xavier whispered as the evening wound down. Home. The word held such promise now. "Yes," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Let's go home." Their first year of marriage passed in a blur of hard work and joy as they settled into life together. The new house took shape over the summer and fall, with Xavier's ranch hands helping with the heavy construction and Madeline directing the interior details. By their first Christmas as husband and wife, they were cozily installed in their new home. Madeline continued teaching in Wallace, riding to town each day when weather permitted and staying over at her old quarters above the schoolhouse when winter storms made travel dangerous. It wasn't an easy arrangement, but it worked because they both believed in the importance of her work. On a warm evening in early June, just over a year after their wedding, Madeline sat on their new porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Xavier joined her, placing a cup of tea on the small table beside her chair. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling into his own seat. "Perfect," she agreed, then turned to him with a smile that couldn't be contained. "I have something to tell you." Xavier raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Dr. Miller confirmed it today when I was in town." She took a deep breath. "We're going to have a baby." "In January?" Joy and concern warred on Xavier's face. Are you all right with this?" Madeline understood his worry. Her pregnancy with Elizabeth had ended in tragedy, and the fear of history repeating itself was natural. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "but also hopeful, Doctor Miller says I'm healthy and there's no reason to expect problems." Xavier moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together this time. You won't be alone for a moment." "I know." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "That makes all the difference in the world." The pregnancy progressed well through summer and fall, with Madeline continuing to teach until December, when the school board insisted she take leave earlier than planned due to the approaching winter weather. Dr. Miller made regular visits to the ranch, assuring them both that everything appeared normal. Still, as her due date approached, Madeline couldn't help but worry. The memory of Elizabeth's too early arrival and brief life weighed heavily on her mind. Xavier, understanding her fears, rarely left her side in those final weeks, delegating ranch work to his trusted hands. On a snowy night in mid-January, Madeline's labor began. Xavier sent a ranch hand galloping through the darkness to fetch Dr. Miller from Wallace while he helped his wife through the early stages, remembering what he could from books they'd studied together in preparation. The doctor arrived just before dawn, bringing Mrs. Owens with him to assist. The labor was long and difficult, with Madeline's strength flagging as hours passed. Xavier remained by her side, wiping her brow, holding her hand, and murmuring encouragement when her resolve wavered. "You can do this," he told her as she struggled through another contraction. "You're the strongest woman I know." Just as the winter sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ranch, their son was born robust and healthy with a lusty cry that echoed through the house. "He's perfect, Doctor," Miller announced, placing the swaddled infant in Madeline's trembling arms. Strong lungs, good color, couldn't ask for better. Tears streamed down Madeline's face as she gazed at her son. He had Xavier's dark hair and her green eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Xavier sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around his wife, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "What shall we call him?" Madeline looked up at her husband, love overflowing. "I thought perhaps Thomas, after your father, Thomas Edward Galloway." "Thomas," Xavier repeated, testing the name. "It suits him." As Mrs. Owens and Dr. Miller quietly left the room to give the new family privacy, Madeline felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find after losing Elizabeth. Her firstborn would always have a place in her heart, but now there was room for this new love as well, an expanding circle that encompassed her son, her husband, and the life they were building together. "I was thinking," Xavier said softly, watching Thomas's tiny fingers wrap around his much larger one, "that when spring comes we might plant a tree for Elizabeth. Near the Thinking Valley, somewhere beautiful where we can visit and remember her." Fresh tears welled in Madeline's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "I'd like that very much." In that moment, with her son in her arms and her husband beside her, Madeline realized how far she had come from that desperate night in Wallace when Xavier had first found her. The words he'd spoken then, "You haven't lost your heart," had proven prophetic. Her heart had not only survived, it had expanded, healed, and found a capacity for joy she hadn't believed possible in the depths of her grief. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I love you, Madeline Galloway." "And I love you," she replied, knowing it was both the simplest and most profound truth of her life. Outside, snow continued to fall softly on the Montana landscape, but inside the Galloway home, warmth and hope abounded as a family forged from shared sorrow embraced their future together. 5 years later, on a bright September afternoon, Madeline stood on the porch of their home, watching Xavier teaching 5-year-old Thomas to ride his new pony in the yard. Beside her, 3-year-old Sarah played with wooden blocks, her dark curls bouncing as she constructed an elaborate tower. The ranch had prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's cattle operation had expanded, and Madeline had established a small school on the property that served not only their children, but those of the ranch hands and nearby homesteaders. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself growing up in Boston, but it was rich with purpose and love. Each year on Elizabeth's birthday, the family made a pilgrimage to the aspen tree they'd planted in the Thinking Valley. They would picnic there, tell stories, and ensure that Elizabeth remained a presence in their family memory. Thomas and Sarah grew up understanding they had an older sister watching over them from heaven, a concept they accepted with the simple faith of childhood. Wallace had grown too, becoming a proper town with more businesses, a larger school, and even a small lending library that Madeline had helped establish. They still maintained close ties with the community, attending church services when weather permitted and hosting an annual harvest festival at the ranch that had become a regional tradition. Madeline's hand went to the silver locket she still wore daily, containing a tiny curl of Elizabeth's hair on one side and a family portrait in miniature on the other. It was her talisman, connecting past to present, sorrow to joy. Xavier completed Thomas's riding lesson and sent the boy to cool down his pony with a walk around the corral. He climbed the porch steps, leaning against the railing beside Madeline. "He's a natural," he said proudly. "Just like his mother," Madeline laughed. "I was hardly a natural. I recall being terrified of Daisy the first time you put me on her. But you learned quickly." Xavier slipped an arm around her waist. "One of the many things I love about you." As the golden afternoon light bathed the ranch in warmth, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair on that night in Wallace to this moment of contentment, she had traversed a landscape of grief and healing that had ultimately led to joy. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Madeline smiled, leaning against his strong shoulder. "Just how fortunate we are, how life can surprise you with happiness when you least expect it." In the yard, Thomas had dismounted and was carefully brushing his pony, his small face serious with concentration. Sarah's block tower had reached impressive heights. The ranch hands were returning from the day's work, the smell of dinner cooking wafted from the kitchen, and the Montana sunset was beginning to paint the sky in brilliant hues. "Very fortunate indeed," Xavier agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. As dusk settled over the Galloway ranch, bringing with it the promise of another day to come, Madeline felt the truth of the words Xavier had spoken to her that first night when she was broken by grief, and he was a stranger offering unexpected comfort. Her heart, once shattered by loss, had not only survived but flourished, finding a capacity for love greater than she had ever imagined possible. And in that knowledge she found peace.